The phone call that shattered my perception of my husband came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen putting the final touches on Elise's 7th birthday cake when I heard Declan's raised voice seeping through the crack in his study door. "I don't care what it takes, Davis. Just make sure those documents disappear before the feds get a hold of them," he growled in a tone I didn't recognize. "We're talking millions on the line here. Do whatever you have to." My heart pounded as I strained to make out the muffled response on the other end of the line. When had my loving husband turned so menacing? Frozen in place, my hands still gripping the piping bag, I tried to rationalize the outburst as stress from work. But that explanation rang hollow as his words replayed in my mind, threats and sums of money so large I couldn't conceptualize them. Just then, Elise bounded into the kitchen in her pajamas, oblivious to the storm brewing down the hall. "Mommy, is the cake ready yet?" she asked, craning her neck up towards the treat on the counter. I forced a smile, not wanting to frighten her. "Almost, baby. Why don't you go pick out a movie for us to watch together?" Squealing with delight, she scurried off to the living room, while I stood paralyzed, my gut twisting with dread. Who was this volatile man I thought I knew so well, the same person I'd built a life with over the last decade? Moments later, Declan sauntered into the kitchen, smoothing his tousled hair back into place as he approached. Before I could confront him about the call, he pulled me into an embrace, planting a kiss on my forehead. "Smells delicious, babe," he said, eyeing the sugary concoction. "Can't wait to see the look on Ellie's face tomorrow." I clung to him desperately, searching his warm brown eyes for any flicker of the rage I'd heard moments ago. But his expression remained tender and serene as ever, as if that disturbing call had been merely a terrible dream. My instincts warned me something was askew, but I questioned myself. Could I completely upend our family on a few overheard fragments, no matter how alarming? Pushing the nagging doubts aside for the moment, I smiled up at him. She's going to be so thrilled. Maybe we could kick off her big day with a horseback riding lesson like she's been asking? Declan chuckled, smoothing my hair from my face. Anything for my 2 favorite girls. That night, as I gazed at him snoring peacefully beside me, I knew our cozy world was on the precipice of crumbling. My husband, my rock, my partner of 10 years, had a sinister secret. And I realized with gut-wrenching certainty that unraveling it would be the only way to truly know the man I'd once trusted with every fiber of my being. Over the next few weeks, Declan's behavior only grew more erratic and disturbing. Simple things, like his work stories not adding up or a detached demeanor when playing with Elise, raised red flags I could no longer ignore. One night after tucking Elise in, I decided to finally confront him about the suspicious call. "Honey, can we talk?" He looked up from his laptop, brow furrowed. "What's up?" Taking a deep breath, I recounted what I'd overheard that fateful evening, the hushed threats, the mention of incriminating documents. By the time I finished, his face had drained of color. "You were eavesdropping on my private conversations?" he snapped, slamming the laptop shut. I recoiled at the venom in his tone. "I didn't mean to, Just what? Thought you'd play private investigator on your own husband?" He rose from his chair, towering over me. "Those calls were confidential business matters, not some tawdry affair for you to stick your nose in." Indignation flared within me. "Declan, you were talking about hiding evidence and paying people off. What am I supposed to think?" His jaw tightened. "You're supposed to trust that I'd never do anything to jeopardize this family. But I see now that was a mistake." With that, he brushed past me and stormed out of the room, leaving me shaken and utterly adrift. Was the man I loved truly capable of such sinister deeds? The next day, the local news provided a chilling answer. Declan's employer, an investment firm downtown, was under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Reeling from the revelation, I scrolled through the damning coverage, each breathless report more lurid than the last. That's when Elise wandered into the room, amber eyes wide. "Mommy, why are they saying such mean things about Daddy's work on TV?" I scrambled to find reassuring words, but she seemed to read the worry etched on my face. "Don't worry," she said, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Daddy told me not to talk about his secret meetings at home or he'll get really mad. But I won't say anything, I promise." My blood turned to ice in my veins as her innocent words detonated the final shred of doubt. My husband, my daughter's hero, was not only mixed up in illicit corporate schemes, but forcing a 7-year-old to cover up for his misdeeds. Rage engulfed me, burning hotter with every ragged breath until I could scarcely see straight. That evening, while Declan sat fuming in the den, I scoured his study for any trace of evidence to confirm my darkest suspicions. In his desk drawer, buried beneath reams of financial reports, I found a disposable prepaid phone, likely the device he'd used to make those cryptic calls. But it was the sheaf of documents underneath that made my heart plummet into my gut. Emails, incriminating spreadsheets, offshore bank statements, all leading an unmistakable trail back to Declan's role in pillaging funds and defrauding clients. The confidential business matters he'd raged about were nothing more than a litany of high-stakes crimes designed to bankroll our luxurious lifestyle. My hands trembled as I clutched the documents, the realm of plausible deniability evaporating like a noxious gas. The man I'd loved, the father of my child, was a con man teetering on the edge of sheer criminality, and he'd willingly entangled our entire family in his web of deceit. With the damning evidence clutched in my hands, I knew I had to confront Declan again, no matter how explosive the fallout. As I marched into the den, resolution steeled my nerves against the fear bubbling in my gut. We need to talk, now. I slapped the incriminating papers onto his desk, scattering them across the polished mahogany surface. His head whipped up, eyes widening as he registered the disclosed secrets. "Where did you get those?" he growled, shoving his chair back with a harsh screech. "From your locked desk drawer, the one with all your little secrets tucked away." I crossed my arms, holding his seething gaze. I knew those calls were more than just confidential business, but this... God, Declan, how could you get mixed up in something so blatantly illegal? In a blur of motion, he shot to his feet and closed the distance between us, fists clenched. "You had no right going through my private things," he roared, spittle flying as his face flushed crimson. "Those documents are part of an active federal case. You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you could bring down on this family?" I stood my ground, crushing down the urge to flinch. "The only one bringing trouble is you and your shady Wall Street dealings. What about our daughter, huh? How does getting her trapped in your sordid web of fraud not eating you up inside?" Declan's hardened expression faltered, the slightest crack forming in his rage mask. "Elise?" He sank back onto the couch, dragging a hand down his face. "You think I don't agonize over putting you both at risk? Those spreadsheets, those accounts, that was all to secure a future for our family, babe. A future better than anything my old man could scrape together with his deadbeat salary." I scoffed bitterly at his attempts to rationalize the unforgivable. "And having your little girl lie for you, keep your criminal secrets, how does that noble motive fit into your twisted plans?" A muscle ticked in his jaw as we faced off in tense silence, the weight of his innumerable transgressions pressing down like a shroud. Just as I opened my mouth to unleash another fusillade, a tiny voice piped up from the doorway. "Mommy? Daddy?" Elise lingered on the threshold in her flannel nightgown, eyes swollen from crying. I had another bad dream about the monsters. My heart shattered into pieces as realization washed over me with brutal clarity. In her childlike innocence, she'd unconsciously represented the darkness pervading her own home. The true monsters weren't a fantasy, but the very man tasked with protecting her. Declan softened for a fleeting moment, lifting his arms as if to embrace our daughter. But as soon as Elise shrank back, that tender facade crumpled, his face contorting in a foul leer. "Get out, Elise," he spat with repulsive venom. "This is grown-up talk, and you've stuck your nose where it doesn't belong for far too long already." Before I could react, he snatched a paperweight from the desk and hurled it at the terrified girl. It struck the doorframe mere inches from her head, shards of glass detonating in all directions as she released a blood-curdling wail. "Declan, you psychopath!" I screeched, shoving him back as he advanced on the sobbing child. "Get away from her!" Gathering Elise into my arms, I fled the den in blind panic, my little girl's desperate cries echoing through the cavernous home that had once shielded us so lovingly. Behind the mahogany doors, Declan's own monstrous roars reverberated like some demonic force unleashed. as I clutched my baby to my chest, her warmth the only solace from the horror. One certainty crystallized amid the chaos. Whatever the cost, I had to extract us from this nightmare before his swirling malevolence consumed us both. The morning after Declan's violent outburst, a heavy pall hung over our once idyllic home. Elise clung to me like a second skin, whimpering at the slightest creak or groan of the old house. My own heart raced with each unexplained thump, half expecting my unhinged husband to come raging through the door at any moment. By the time the pale winter light seeped through the curtains, I could no longer abide the sickening tension. I had to regain some semblance of control over this rapidly fracturing situation. Steeling my nerves, I tucked Elise into the living room with her favorite movies before creeping down the hall toward Declan's study. The door was ajar, the room beyond disheveled from our cataclysmic fight the previous evening. Books and papers were strewn about, the heavy crystal paperweight lying in a shower of glittering shards, a silent herald of the violence that had shattered our domestic peace. Bracing myself, I nudged the door open farther and stepped inside. Declan sat hunched behind the desk, nursing a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. His shirt hung untucked, his normally immaculate hair disheveled. At the sound of my footsteps, his bloodshot eyes flicked up with a chilling cynicism. "So," he began, vowels thick and slurred, "the self-righteous princess has emerged to cast judgment on her monstrous husband." I battled to keep my voice from wavering. "Declan, we need to talk about last night." "About your treacherous snooping?" he snarled, slamming his palm on the desk and making me flinch. "About throwing away everything we've built with your childish tantrums?" My mouth set in a grim line as I fought the urge to recoil from his acidic vitriol. This poisonous version of the man I married couldn't be reasoned with, not until I exposed the root of his malice. "If you think protecting our family means terrorizing our daughter, then yes, we have a serious problem," I shot back, unflinching. "Those business dealings you claim were a means to an end? Those were criminal acts, Declan. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. And you forced Elise to cover for your shady tracks." To my shock, a cruel chuckle rumbled from his throat as he knocked back another swig of his drink. "You want to talk crimes, princess? Let's start with your flagrant violation of attorney-client privilege when you rifled through those documents. That's what, 3 years in the slammer right there?" As the words slithered from his mouth, a glacial chill gripped me. In his twisted reality, I was the criminal for uncovering his misdeeds. "Not to mention my future earning potential, you've utterly decimated with your self-righteous crusade," he continued with a disturbing calm, rising from his chair to stalk closer. "You think your paltry pay uploading stock photos even qualifies as providing for this family? Without my income stream, we're left with what? That fleabag cottage your deadbeat dad left you in his estate." My insides reeled from the verbal onslaught as he towered over me, the scent of whiskey and stale cologne invading my senses. Though I longed to flee from the unstable fire raging in his eyes, something stronger took root, a primal instinct to protect my child from this inexplicable darkness. "You're delusional, Declan," I managed through gritted teeth, willing my hands to remain steady. "After everything you've done, jeopardizing Elise's well-being, you think you have any claim over providing for us? You're going to jail, you sick bastard, even if I have to make sure of it myself." At those words, any vestiges of the man I'd once loved contorted into a vicious snarl of hatred. His fingers coiled around my throat with preternatural strength as he slammed me against the desk, upending papers and trinkets in a deafening clatter. "You sanctimonious bitch," he bellowed in my face, spittle flying as his forearm crushed my windpipe. "I'll show you delusional." As Declan's snarling face hovered above me, all reason and humanity extinguished behind his crazed eyes, I felt a cold certainty. This man intended to kill me. I clawed desperately at his vice-like grip, but his forearm remained an inflexible bar across my windpipe. Black spots erupted in my vision as I choked on the scant airflow. In a final burst of adrenaline, I slammed my knee upwards, making sickening contact. Declan recoiled with a guttural groan, his hands flying to his groin as I crumpled to the floor, wheezing in ragged gulps of precious oxygen. "You crazy bitch!" he growled through clenched teeth. "I'll make you regret that." Sensing his fury reigniting, I scrabbled backwards towards the door on all fours. desperate to put distance between us. Just as his hulking form advanced again, little feet pounded up the hallway. "Mommy?" Elise appeared in the doorway, her tiny voice cutting through the chaos. Declan froze, seemingly snapping out of his psychotic trance for a fleeting moment as his gaze fell upon our cowering daughter. She clutched her tattered stuffed bunny to her chest, those soulful amber eyes now marred with terror. In that suspended breath, a profound shift overcame my husband's face, not one of remorse, but eerie calculation as he processed the situation. When he finally spoke, the malice had receded, replaced by a sickening false calm. "It's okay, Princess. Mommy and I were just having a grown-up disagreement." He straightened his rumpled shirt, smoothing back his disheveled hair in a perverse mimicry of composure. "Why don't you go pick out a puzzle for us to do together? Make it a hard one." Elise shrank back uncertainly, her small frame trembling as her gaze flickered between the two of us. "But I heard yelling." "Don't question me, Elise," Declan erupted, his failed mask of tranquility shattering like a ceramic vase. "Just do as you're told for once." With a terrified squeak, she scurried away down the hall, no doubt scurrying to the safety of her bedroom to escape his towering presence. Tears burned in my eyes as his cruelty lanced my heart. Once the echo of her footsteps faded, my husband turned his smoldering glare back towards me, his expression morphing into one of chilling resolution. "I don't know what insane game you think you're playing at, Cora." He began in a measured tone that felt more unsettling than his previous rage. "But I'll be damned if I let you take my family away from me, the life I've bled and sacrificed for." He stalked towards his disheveled desk and snatched up his cell phone, thumbs flying over the screen. "What are you doing?" I croaked out, dreading his response. "Calling my lawyers," he replied coldly. "Getting ahead of the shitstorm you've unleashed before you can go broadcasting any more of those corporate secrets you stole." "Those documents prove you're a criminal," I spat, fury reigniting within my battered body. "Those documents," he countered with a cruel smile, "are inadmissible evidence that I have a right to protect through attorney-client privilege. You violated that sacred trust when you stole them, which my legal team will make sure the courts recognize as a felony." Dread coiled in my stomach as his twisted logic rang terrifyingly true. In my desperation to expose his depravity, had I inadvertently handed him the bullet for my own demise? "So you can either come clean with me, cooperate to fix this damn mess quietly," Declan continued, that reptilian smile never faltering, "or you can take your chances as an accomplice obstructing a federal investigation." "Up to you, babe." In that moment, his cellular chirped to life as our bank's number flashed across the screen. With a sardonic wink, my husband raised the device to his ear. "Looks like we need to have a talk about our finances, too." Over the next several days, Declan's callous dominance only tightened its oppressive grip over our household. Once my initial banking passwords were breached, he systematically drained my personal accounts, leaving me financially marooned. "Can't have you siphoning off money for some harebrained escape plot, now can we?" He taunted with a cruel smile, slapping the latest zero balance statements onto the kitchen counter in front of me. I clenched my fists, rage and hopelessness warring within me like combatants in the Colosseum. Forced into destitution by the very man I'd vowed to love and honor, I had nowhere to turn, no funds to subsidize an escape for Elise and myself. It wasn't long before Declan's smothering control extended far beyond simple finance. His hired legal muscle churned out restraining dictates by the hour. I was prohibited from contacting law enforcement or advocacy services, removing Elise from the premises, even making unauthorized use of the home's amenities. Like a gazelle ensnared in the python's voracious coils, I found every desperate bid for freedom only entrenching me deeper in Declan's meticulously constructed trap. Whenever I tried to slip away for even a private phone call, his hired goons would materialize from the shadows, eyes concealed behind mirrored shades as they blocked my path with crossed arms. All the while, Declan would smirk in the background, secure in the knowledge that I was neutered, utterly impotent. And always lurking at the fringes of this waking nightmare was my innocent little girl, wounded eyes silently pleading for circumstances she couldn't comprehend. My heart shattered every time Elise instinctively shrank from her father's presence, the emotional scars of his violent outbursts now seared into her psyche. At night, I lay awake plotting any conceivable path out of this fresh hell, contacting family, taking out loans, scraping together whatever meager funds I could to finance a clean, evaporative exit. But Declan had foreseen every eventuality, leaving me more cornered than a sewer rat in a flaming baited trap. On the 7th interminable day of this perverted house arrest, I finally accepted the only glimmer of hope was to outmaneuver Declan through guile. As I pretended to drift into yet another fitful rest that evening, I clutched the disposable phone I'd covertly procured like a lifeline. Painstakingly, I tapped out a coded message to the only friend I could still trust, praying she would understand the layered urgency of my desperate plea. If anyone could bail me out of this steadily calcifying prison, it would be Gwen. My thumb hovered over the send button, both elation and trepidation gripping me. One errant movement, one infinitesimal slip-up, and Declan would sniff out my gambit before I could so much as blink. I had one tenuous shot to light the fuse for our potential salvation. No more delaying the inevitable. I punched send, sealing my family's fate. Either freedom beckoned over the horizon, or the merciless anvil would clamp down with finality. For the next 12 hours, I sat vigil in excruciating silence, willing my expression into one of serene obliviousness whenever the pretense of breakfast or Declan's leering presence demanded it. My gut roiled with every unaccounted-for creak, bracing for the inevitable confrontation over my badly concealed transgressions. Just after noon chimed, the Winchester doorbell resounded through the foyer, nearly causing my heart to detonate from my chest cavity. I froze, ears straining, as thudding footsteps and muted voices preceded the study door banging open. What is the meaning of this? Declan roared as 3 grim-faced federal agents swarmed into the living area, badges displayed. I scrambled to my feet, hands shaking with a dizzying cocktail of relief and mortal terror. One semi-automatic sidearm swung in my direction before steadying inches from my face. "Cora Manchester?" the lead agent barked. "We have an authorized warrant for your protective custody." As his compatriots slapped tactical cuffs on my bewildered husband, Declan wheeled on me with feral hatred contorting his features. "You lying, traitorous wench," he bellowed, spittle flying as the agents wrenched his arms behind his back. "After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me?" The rage and humiliation radiating from him in scathing waves should have paralyzed me. But as my gaze met Elise's terrified one peering from around the staircase corner, only one Schlina overwhelmed every primal instinct: protection. I had to see this through for her sake. Drawing a fortifying breath, I steadied my nerves under Declan's smoldering glare. "What you've done for us? Your fraud and criminality cost us any ounce of a real family. You deluded animal. Just be grateful I've only seen that you face justice and not a bullet." With that, I lifted my manacled wrists and allowed the agents to lead me towards the phalanx of federal SUVs idling outside, Retribution's resounding thunder finally exorcising the tyranny festering under my own roof. As the FBI convoy roared away from the curb, sirens wailing, I clutched Elise's trembling form against me in the back of the armored SUV. My little girl's cheeks glistened with terrified tears, her tiny hands fisting my sweater like a lifeline. "It's okay, baby," I murmured into her soft auburn hair, struggling to modulate my own ragged breaths. "Daddy can't hurt us anymore." The words felt bizarrely hollow, despite the iron truth of the sentiment. After so many weeks languishing under Declan's escalating reign of terror, the very notion of freedom seemed utterly paradoxical. No sooner had the thought materialized than a cacophonous explosion detonated a few blocks away, the shockwave rocking our vehicle like a skipping stone. I instinctively smothered Elise's tiny frame against me as smoke and debris billowed into view through the SUV's tinted windows. "All units be advised, we have shots fired!" One of the agents barked into his radio, his jaw clenching. "The target's residence has been hit with an incendiary device." My heart plummeted in concert with the acrid smoke billowing from the fresh scene of devastation. The house. Our home. Declan. Before I could voice the kaleidoscope of questions rocketing through my psyche, the agent's radio squawked again with a strained voice. "This is Stryker Unit, requesting immediate backup. We are taking sustained automatic fire from unknown shooters inside the house. The bomb squad and HRT need to roll out immediately." Elise's piercing wail cut through the tactical chatter as more thunderous detonations shook our vehicle like a rag doll amid the maelstrom. Though every parental instinct demanded I provide soothing affirmations, I could only gaze on in numb shock at the surreal tableau of fire and violence erupting around us. Declan's true depravity knew no bounds. Rather than face the consequences of his actions, he would indiscriminately slaughter anyone and anything in his path. Before my scattered thoughts could fully coalesce, a hissed order crackled over the radio for our transport team to peel away from the burgeoning war zone. The engine roared back to life as the SUV executed an armored reversal and peeled away at breakneck speed with an earth-shuddering squeal of reinforced tires. Metal barricades and concrete jersey walls whipped past the windows in a sickening blur as we careened away from the deafening violence. Still, I could not tear my eyes from the carnage painting itself across the horizon in shades of fire and smoke, all born from the choices of a single monstrous man. A husband and father who so blithely incinerated the laws of man and God to assuage his own hubris. When the tremors battering our vehicle finally subsided, one of the agents slumped back against the reinforced partition with a ragged sigh. Christ on a cracker, they weren't kidding that this guy was batshit crazy. He cast a sidelong look at Elise and me, bundled together on the bench seat. "Sorry about that, kid. Your daddy clearly has some real problems keeping his business clean." Before I could unleash the torrent of outrage and venom simmering beneath my skin, Elise peered up at me with those saucer-wide amber eyes, seeming to plead through her torrent of tears. Throat aching, I forced down the growling invectives clamoring for release and simply pulled her trembling little body tighter against my own. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of shouted orders and screeching vehicular cavalcades, speeding in all directions. At some point, reinforced assault vehicles joined our armored caravan, heavily armed HRT officers clinging to the rumbling transports like grim-faced gargoyles. As our path curved towards the heart of an auxiliary command staging area, it became abundantly clear how catastrophic Declan's violent unraveling had become. Choppers swarmed overhead, hovering floodlights bleaching the ground in clinical white, while robotic drones flickered through the air like mechanized insects. The SUV finally rolled to a shuddering stop as our doors were wrenched open from outside, figures clad in tactical gear efficiently ushering us into the subterranean refuge beneath the staging area. Weaving through prefab command modules and field terminals glowing with encrypted data, a towering silhouette from the bustle to greet our bedraggled party. Agent Vanover, the grizzled woman in a sharp-rest suit intoned by way of greeting, those pale eyes boring into me with unsettling intensity. "I see, Mr. Manchester's threats weren't just saber-rattling after all." Before I could respond, her gaze drifted down to take in Elise's hunched, quivering posture. "My God," she breathed, something like genuine pity creasing her stern features. "That poor child." It was a simple reaction, yet those 3 syllables detonated the dam of pent-up emotion, trauma, and sheer, unadulterated relief within me in a torrent of throat-cleaving sobs. I'm not sure whether it was Elise's broken whimpers or my own gulping gasps for air that finally breached the berserker fog of terror and rage and shame clogging my mind. All I knew was that in that singular crystalline moment, every last ounce of fear evaporated in the presence of human compassion and the promise of justice. Whatever blood toll awaited back at our former home, whatever unspeakable price the demons of Declan's reckoning would extract, we would survive this crucible. More importantly, my little girl was finally safe from her father's maniacal shadow once and for all. In the aftermath of Declan's explosive unraveling, our lives were upended in more ways than I could have envisioned. In addition to the charred husk of our former home, every asset my husband had illicitly amassed over his criminal career was seized. Offshore accounts drained, property deeds reclaimed, even the luxury SUV impounded as criminal evidence. Not that I mourned any of those ill-gotten trappings. If rebuilding from scratch was the penance for untangling myself from Declan's poisonous web, I would gladly pay it 1,000,000 times over. What did gut me like a bayonet thrust was the collateral fallout for Elise. My sweet baby girl, already bearing scars far too deep for her tender years. now had her innocence compounded by the trauma of witnessing such violence and depravity. Those first few nights alone together in the Spartan safe house, I would jolt awake in cold sweats to her muffled sobs from the adjoining room. Each time I would gather her up in my arms, rocking her gently as she unleashed the torrent of fear and bewilderment in rambling pleas to make the monsters go away. It shattered my heart into shards to see her so petrified, so unmoored from any sense of security I had failed so catastrophically to provide. All I could do was swathe her in my embrace and murmur soothing mantras about the darkness passing, about brighter days peeking over the horizon. In those first turbulent weeks, I shunned all inquiries about media appearances or interviews regarding Declan's high-profile crimes. The DA could bloviate all she wanted at press conferences, decrying his unforgivable violations and staggering breach of public trust. In my book, the only part that mattered was that he was off the streets, remanded to federal custody to fester in his own savagery. What did consume my every waking moment was ensuring the return of any funds or assets he had covertly drained or transferred from my own accounts during our domestic hostage situation. Armed with the documentation of his malfeasance, it took numerous court dates, but eventually the money he had so maliciously stripped from me was returned in full. Not that I had any intention of replicating our formerly opulent lifestyle. The first call I made after replenishing my finances was to my older sister down in Richmond, asking if she could watch Elise for a few weeks while I took care of some personal affairs. When my rental car finally rolled up the gravel drive to our childhood home, the old cabin appeared just as ramshackle and weather-beaten as it had in my youth. Roof shingles askew, the wrapped porch slightly sagging in places. Yet the mere sight of those familiar angles untouched by Declan's darkness had hot tears misting my eyes. My father had been adamant about never selling this rustic mountain retreat, his personal Eden far from the trappings of the material world. Though only large enough for a simple 2 bedrooms, the property encompassed nearly 100 wooded acres, plenty of open space for 2 lost souls in desperate need of healing and sanctuary. Over the following year, I channeled every ounce of personal revenue into restoring the ramshackle cabin and its surrounding land. It wasn't merely a renovation in the structural sense, but an active exorcism of the toxicity and despair that had threatened to subsume my very existence back in the city. With each newly installed window overlooking the gently rolling hills and sycamore groves, I could feel layers of psychic grime sloughing away. Every fresh coat of sun-bleached paint helped cauterize the mental and emotional lacerations inflicted by my monstrous former partner's madness. And with each lilting brook babbling gently nearby, and every chorus of cicadas trilling beneath the star-speckled canopy at night, I could sense Elise's spirit regaining its resiliency in aching increments. Her initial night terrors gradually subsided, replaced with restorative slumbers that left her bounding through wildflower fields each new morning with a renewed spark of innocent mirth. By the time the cabin and surrounding acreage had been fully rehabilitated, my own sense of shattered self finally began to knit itself back together as well. I was no longer the brittle, gasping shell of a woman torn asunder by deception and psychological warfare. Nor was I some brazen victim raging incessantly for retribution, thirsting for Declan's eternal suffering. In a very real sense, I was reborn from the smoldering ashes of my former life. Tempered in the purifying fires of adversity, I had been forged into a resilient new alloy, a protective, nurturing force for the preservation of my family and our hard-won serenity. It took another 6 months before I was able to share my full story with victim advocacy groups and law enforcement associations, aiming to pierce the pernicious silence surrounding financial abuse and coercive domestic partnerships. Where others still shrank from confronting these shadowed social cancers, Elise and I strode forward as beacons of survival and empowerment, living testaments to the regenerative capacity of the human spirit. While the generational trauma inflicted upon my little girl can never be fully expunged, I remain resolute that her path will remain unshackled by the oppressive chains of her father's monumental moral failures. Where Declan committed his life to the pursuit of vapid corporeal riches, Elise will only know richness of character and resilience. And each time I gaze out over the dusky rolling hillsides from our little cabin's porch, breathing in the piney embrace of our hard-won freedom, I know we have both discovered the true treasures worth safeguarding: family, refuge, and the invincible fortitude to prevail over even the darkest, most insidious transgressions.
I had assumed that this new chapter in my life would begin under more favorable conditions, but now it does. My husband, Kevin, has demolished our family home, leaving me standing in front of an empty place where both of my parents once stood. Here, amidst the ruins of my early years, Kevin startlingly disclosed his actual motivations. "What topic are you discussing? Are you crazy? Bring your inheritance to our house now," he yelled. His direct remarks rendered me mute. Still, as the ridiculousness of the scenario struck me, I couldn't hold back my laughter. "Oh, I see. That's what this whole thing was about," I murmured, shaking my head cynically. My spouse Kevin and his parents stared at me in disbelief, not understanding why I would respond the way I did. I took a moment to reintroduce myself, hoping that would clear things up. Brenda is my name. I'm the modest daughter of a dedicated salaried worker from a lowly beginning. When I was 28, I was married to Kevin, and together we raised 3 amazing kids. Now that I'm 50, I had anticipated a calm existence with my spouse, but circumstances had other ideas. I talked about how difficult it was to care for my sick parents, especially my mother's lengthy battle with cancer. Kevin's support was lacking in spite of the toll it took on me, both emotionally and physically. He frequently bemoaned the hardships of sharing my mother's illness, criticizing everything from the cleaning to the food. In the end, we returned to my parents' house so that my mother could receive better care. Kevin continued to be indifferent to her worsening illness throughout this time, which resulted in her being admitted to the hospital and ultimately passing away. It was distressing to see Kevin act so detached during the funeral arrangements. Even during the funeral, when I really needed his support, he remained distant, choosing to sit in the rear with other distant relatives rather than in the family area with me. I had said to him in a whisper, "I wish you would sit with the family," throughout the service. His response was icy and disengaged. "No, I'm not uncomfortable here. After all, I'm not a blood related," he declared. Hearing us talk, his mother interrupted, saying, "He's your spouse, not your mother's son." Here, Kevin is an outsider. Kevin was detached from his family, and his parents echoed him when they said he shouldn't sit in the family area, even while stories and whispers went around among distant relatives about our tense relationship. They argued that, in spite of the evident stress it created, this commitment to custom was justified. Kevin's parents and my brother's family joined us at my house following the funeral. I remained calm and brought them coffee in spite of their previous insensitivity. But what really got me was their comment about how expensive condolence money is, which made it clear how they really felt about the whole thing. The truth of my new life without my parents, and with a partner who seemed more like a stranger than a spouse, dawned forcibly on me as I stood in the rubble of my boyhood home. I forced a grin and exited the room, watching with heavy heart as I overheard bits and pieces of conversation between Kevin and his parents. They were talking, with a hint of derision, about how hard it was to live with me. It wasn't the first time they had behaved disrespectfully. In fact, it had been a recurring topic in our marriage, made especially difficult by the recent death of my mother and the funeral of my father. When I thought back on these times, I saw how little they had bothered and how much I had put up with. It was terrible to see Kevin's disengagement and even his guilt about the living arrangements I had forced upon him. I heard them laughing behind me, berating me for not allowing them to take my mother's possessions. Kevin and his parents stormed out, labeling me an outsider, when I asked that her mementos be divided among our family members, causing a heated confrontation. Following the event, Kevin took a temporary leave of absence. He surprised me by saying he was worried and by giving me and the kids travel vouchers for a vacation. I was surprised by his abrupt change in attitude, but I was also glad. I asked in jest, "I wonder if your father felt guilty," as I took the coupons. Kevin, feeling more laid back than normal, told me to take my time. "Yeah, stay at the kids' places if you like," he said, indicating that he intended to relax at his parents' house while I was away. Following his advice, I visited my son Stephen and daughter Susan before the trip. Seeing them during the time I was taking care of my mother had been challenging. To lessen their everyday difficulties, I spent some time preparing and freezing meals for them. "Mom, you never get to relax, but thank you." "This helps," they both said, appreciative of the home-cooked meals. Thanks to Kevin's unexpected gesture, the trip finally came, and I spent a relaxing time at the hotel with my children. The break seemed to wash away some of the fatigue and sorrow from the months of caregiving and the loss of my parents. After nearly a week, we returned home with renewed spirits and bright smiles. That was fun. "We should thank Dad once in a while," Susan suggested, a sentiment that caught me off guard. "Really, once in a while?" I replied, still unsure about the sudden shift in Kevin's behavior, but willing to acknowledge his effort. This time, I couldn't help but chuckle, albeit with a tinge of suspicion. "But I wonder if he's up to something," I said half-jokingly. Susan quickly dismissed my doubts. "Don't say that. Your father must have had his reasons," she replied confidently. I smiled, planning to return home, share the wonderful memories with Kevin, and perhaps start afresh in our married life. However, the scene that greeted me upon my return left me speechless. "What's going on?" "The house is." My voice trailed off as I took in the sight of where our family home once stood, now shockingly absent. Then Kevin appeared, his parents smirking behind him, their expressions unnervingly gleeful. "Kevin, what's the meaning of this?" I demanded, my confusion turning to anger. Kevin, mirroring his parents' unsettling smiles, responded, "Finally, the baggage is gone. From today, we'll be living with my parents at my house." His words hit me like a cold splash of water. "Why are you talking about this?" I countered, struggling to maintain my composure against Kevin's arrogant declaration. He coldly continued, "Lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Come to our house with the inheritance already. Everything you inherited belongs to me." The truth was stark and painful. The disappearance of my house was Kevin's doing, all for inheritance. Despite the overwhelming mix of frustration and sadness, I refused to let Kevin manipulate the situation. "No way," I thought to myself and burst into laughter at their smug faces. "What? Why are you laughing? What a strange woman. Has she gone mad?" My mother-in-law muttered, looking at me as if I were a ghost. Facing them squarely, I declared, "Don't you guys know? I didn't inherit a single penny, so there's no inheritance." My laughter resumed, mocking their greedy assumptions. Kevin, confused and angry, demanded, "What do you mean? Explain yourself." But I chose silence. There was no need to enlighten them further. I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it alone, I said firmly, rejecting his proposal outright. My mother-in-law's anger flared. "You helped with your parents' household, but you won't do ours," she accused. "You know why I did that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? But you chose to do so because you didn't want to do housework," I retorted, leaving Kevin and his mother biting their lips in frustration. "And demolishing my family home on your own. There are things you can and can't do, I yelled at them, the betrayal cutting deep. Without another word, I left the scene, Kevin's voice trailing after me. "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. I needed to secure a place to sleep for the night and couldn't bear to see Kevin's face any longer. Immediately, I consulted a lawyer. It couldn't be that easy to demolish a house, especially one still in my mother's name. Upon investigation, an unbelievable truth came to light. Kevin and my father-in-law had orchestrated the demolition themselves, utilizing acquaintances from my father-in-law's demolition company and renting heavy machinery. They had even given me the travel vouchers to conveniently get me out of the way. The realization of such deceit brought tears to my eyes and filled me with a profound sense of betrayal. Is there any way to punish the three of them? I asked the lawyer through tears, desperate for justice. The lawyer gave me a reassuring smile as he laid out the legal options. Your husband, who demolished the house registered under your mother's name without permission, can be charged with criminal damage and sued for compensation, he explained. Encouraged, I nodded, and he promptly began the legal proceedings. A few days later, an irate call from Kevin interrupted my thoughts. "What's this letter of demand about?" he demanded. "Oh, you received it. Since you destroyed our important house, you'll have to compensate," I replied calmly, despite my rising anger. "Compensate? I told you we were moving into the family home. I demolished an unused house for you. You should be grateful, not demanding compensation. Just bring your inheritance and come back home," Kevin insisted arrogantly. "Grateful for having our home demolished? Really?" I scoffed over the phone. "And about the inheritance?" "And coming home? There's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything," I shouted back, my frustration evident. Kevin fell silent, caught off guard by my outburst. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was because of this. I had a whole year to spend with my mother. It was obvious we would have discussed the inheritance. I told her I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother. Thus, all cash and securities were inherited by my brother. He said that I should get the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out to someone else. That was the plan for me to inherit the house. Now, either you and your father restore the family home to its original state or pay the amount written in that letter. I'm being kind enough to suggest a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you," I spoke firmly. "Sorry, I didn't think you'd be so angry," Kevin replied, his tone changing. He began making excuses, suggesting that as long as the family home was there, he couldn't live with his parents, especially since his father had always wanted to live with us. My father-in-law was particularly fond of my son Stephen and had previously expressed a desire to live with him. They had refused to live together back then because it would have made commuting difficult, but his parents seemed to think. I was the one opposed to it. It turns out that Kevin had convinced his parents to agree to this plan by demolishing my family home and making them believe I would move in with the inheritance. This revelation only added to my resolve to see this legal battle through, ensuring that justice was served for the unwarranted destruction of my family home. Even with Kevin's new revelation, forgiveness was far beyond my grasp. "Please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too," Kevin pleaded over the phone. "If he's truly remorseful, then he'll agree to the settlement," I responded firmly before hanging up. Despite his continual apologies through calls and messages, insisting he was sorry, I remained steadfast. "If you're sorry, then hurry up and transfer the money," I pushed back, knowing well that our beloved family home was beyond restoration, but seeking some form of reparation for the deep hurt caused. In the meantime, I stayed at my brother's place with Susan. My brother, aware of the situation and likely furious about the demolition done without his consent, supported my stance. "I won't interfere, but I'll lend a hand." "Do what you think is right, Barbara," he encouraged. Everyone around me condemned Kevin's reckless actions and supported me through this ordeal. A month passed with no compensation, and during that time, Kevin ceased all contact. I couldn't impose on Susan's hospitality indefinitely and was eager to secure the promised funds to stabilize my living situation. However, a startling discovery interrupted these plans. One day, Susan, looking at her smartphone, remarked, "This apron looks a lot like Grandma's." She showed me the screen. It was a product page on a flea market app. The item resembled a unique apron I had made for my mother. "What's this?" I asked, shocked. "This is Grandma's apron." "I made it, so there's no mistake," I said. Susan scrolled through other listings, and we found nearly 50 items that unmistakably belonged to my mother. It was clear to me that Kevin was behind this. Furious, I called him immediately. "What's this about the app, Kevin?" I demanded. He sounded annoyed and feigned ignorance. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's belongings, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now," I confronted him. Kevin, sounding panicked, denied everything. "What? No, it's not me," he stammered. Undeterred, I retorted, "Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back." Susan and I drove to Kevin's parents' house. Upon arrival, I called out for Kevin, who met us at the entrance, visibly flustered. "I don't know anything about it," he insisted. Susan, supporting me, pressed him for answers. While this was happening, Kevin's parents, likely aware of our presence, came outside. His mother, seeing Susan, greeted her with a smile, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Susan, you're here," she said cheerfully. Susan, clearly upset, urged her grandmother to tell Dad to tell the truth. "The truth? It seems like Dad is selling the stuff Grandma passed away with," Susan disclosed. Hearing this, my mother-in-law laughed, dismissing the accusation. Kevin looked increasingly troubled, repeating, "It's not me." Then his mother interjected loudly, "Kevin's selling them. That can't be true." The situation escalated quickly as we confronted the tangled web of deceit, hoping to reclaim what was rightfully ours and uncover the truth behind the distressing sales. The revelation from my mother-in-law left me stunned and drained of color. "But I'm the one selling them," she cheerfully admitted, oblivious to the gravity of her actions. Kevin glanced at his mother with a worried look, clearly aware of the brewing storm. Susan, beside me, was equally shocked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say?" I managed to utter, struggling to keep my voice steady. My mother-in-law, undeterred, continued to explain her new hobby with a light-hearted air. "It's quite a task, you know. Packaging has to be done carefully, and the photos need to be taken well," she said, treating the whole ordeal as if it were a fun pastime. She seemed completely unaware that she was handling and selling stolen goods. My frustration boiled over. "Cancel the listing." "That's not something Grandma can just sell," Susan implored, her voice breaking as she tried to reason with her grandmother. But my mother-in-law dismissed her pleas casually. "What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can, and the rest makes a nice little income. It's good for preventing dementia. After all, I'm the only grandma left, and Susan, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she retorted, her tone flippant and dismissive. It was clear she wouldn't listen to our pleas. Realizing that talking would get us nowhere, I took decisive action. "Let's go home, Susan, but first we need to address this properly," I said, pulling a reluctant Susan with me as we left the house and headed straight to the police station. I had not initially planned to involve the police in the house demolition, but theft and unauthorized sale were a different matter entirely. The officers were prompt in their response, and the flea market app company cooperated by suspending my mother-in-law's account, ensuring no more items would be sold. After leaving the police station, I called Kevin. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? You're complicit. Also, I filed a police report. Please cooperate with the investigation," I asserted firmly. Kevin, frantic, tried to plead family ties. "We're family, aren't we? Please withdraw it." Stranger, right? I still haven't received any compensation or damages for the house being demolished, and I see no remorse from you. I countered, my anger evident. Despite my frustrations, I wasn't devoid of compassion. Having shared many years with Kevin, I sighed, acknowledging the long and possibly rocky path ahead in resolving these issues. I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. And Kevin, your father looked very ill. Has he been to the hospital? I inquired, a part of me still concerned for his well-being despite everything. I had seen my father-in-law earlier, and he looked significantly thinner and unwell compared to just a few months ago. It seemed unlikely that the family had even noticed his declining health amidst their other preoccupations. The next day, my father-in-law called not to express gratitude, but to scold me. "You're treating me like a sick person, planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of me. I have to protect Kevin and your mother." "I'm not going to any hospital," he protested. His response to my genuine concern stung. I apologize if it was out of line. I was just concerned. "I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't patronize me," he snapped back, his words harsh and dismissive. His reaction only added to the complexity of our already strained relationship, leaving me to navigate these turbulent family dynamics with care and resolve. A few days after our conversation, my father-in-law's health declined significantly, leading him to seek medical attention. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Kevin, in a state of panic, called me. "Dad has terminal cancer. What should I do?" he asked, his voice laden with anxiety. I responded coolly, remembering past grievances. "That's none of my concern. Remember what you said when I suggested the hospital. You said you're not weak and short-lived like my parents. Deal with it yourself." "How can you be so heartless?" Kevin retorted. "Who's the heartless one?" "Did you ever say a kind word when my mother was sick?" "Reflect on your actions." I snapped back and ended the call. Sadly, my father-in-law passed away shortly after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor resentment towards someone who had passed away, but recalling all that had transpired, I found myself unable to mourn him genuinely. After the funeral, a will was discovered. It detailed that the house would be inherited by my grandson Stephen, and the remainder of the estate was to be divided between Kevin's mother and Kevin. I was surprised to see Stephen named in the will. My father-in-law had always favored him, perhaps hoping Stephen would continue to live in the house despite the inheritance potentially being more of a burden due to taxes and maintenance. Stephen was pleased to inherit the house, although I had concerns. It wasn't my place to interfere. Stephen's inheritance proceeded, and my mother-in-law, delighted, paid the inheritance taxes, claiming it was all worth it for her grandson. Despite my mixed feelings about the situation, I didn't say anything further. Then something unexpected happened. Responding to a message from Kevin, I visited his parents' house. Arriving there, I was met with a shocking sight. Heavy machinery and demolition workers were tearing down the house. "It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right?" Stephen declared, seemingly unbothered by the destruction. "Stephen, what are you doing? Stop it right now." I cried out, my heart sinking. "Even if I stop now, we can't live there anyway, Mom," Stephen responded calmly. My mother-in-law and Kevin, witnessing the destruction of what was once a significant asset, pleaded with Stephen to stop, but he was resolute. "Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Grandma, you were horrible to her too, right? Did you apologize?" Stephen's tone was sharp, his earlier calmness replaced by a stern demeanor. His words cut deep, and both Kevin and his mother were visibly shaken, kneeling as the machines loudly continued their work. Witnessing the scene, I felt a complex mix of emotions, but ultimately a sense of relief. It seemed that Stephen, in his way, was settling scores and correcting past wrongs against our family. Later, Kevin, having finally received his inheritance, paid the compensation and damages owed to me. Stephen had also managed to recover the stolen items my mother-in-law took from my mother, ensuring their safe return. "Mom, you've got me and Susan," Stephen reassured. Overwhelmed by the support of my children, I finally allowed myself to shed tears of relief. Kevin and his mother, having lost their house and now, with limited resources, moved back into company housing, and their fortunes dramatically reversed. Our greatest asset persisted throughout, and that was the link between Stephen and Susan, which provided love and support to each other, even in the face of hardship. Kevin's mother and him were now the talk of the town. I was contacted by the wife of one of Kevin's coworkers, with whom I am close, following their move back into company housing. Sincerely, I told her the whole backstory. They would have to be thrifty about where they lived in the future, what with Kevin's impending retirement. Although living in corporate housing may not be comfortable for them, they created the circumstance. I occasionally considered asking friends, more out of curiosity and wanting to have a story to tell than anything else, for updates on Kevin and his mother. I kept living with Susan in the interim, but things were about to change. Thanks to the sale of the property where his parents' house formerly stood, Stephen was in a much better financial position and had plans to get married and start a new family. The money from the land had proved to be unexpectedly large, making the house that was torn down shockingly advantageous. Stephen had extended a cordial invitation to move in with him. "Mom, come live with us," and his soon-to-be wife had enthusiastically joined him. Though I knew I couldn't live with Susan forever, I accepted their offer with gratitude. I was resolved to be a mother-in-law who supported and cared for her family without going overboard. I was excited to start a new chapter in my life, one that would be full of love and respect for my growing family. I stood in front of Cheryl and declared my choice with composure. "I'm returning to my folks' house. Perhaps we should think about getting a divorce if this doesn't sit well with you," I stated in an emotionless manner. Cheryl looked back at me, her face displaying a mix of amazement and bewilderment as she tried to process how daring my comment had been. It struck her as a severe blow. "What are you talking about, Raymond?" Her voice was a mix of dismay and bewilderment as she stammered. "It's pretty simple," I said, maintaining a cold, detached stare. "We could build our new house there with the $7 million you inherited. That's my suggestion." Cheryl felt a knot of stress build in her stomach. Her mother's last gift to her, the inheritance, had suddenly become a pawn in my scheme. She said in a barely discernible whisper, "You can't be serious." "But Cheryl, I'm being really serious." I cut through the air with a forceful assertion that it's time for some changes. Her mind flashed back to images of our shared existence, full with love, laughter, and our children's milestones. How had our past become so divergent? Cheryl, a 35-year-old mother of two, believed she had been leading a typical life with a partner she had once had a great love for. I stood before her now, completely changed. "You have no right to dictate how my inheritance is used," she argued, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and denial. "I think I do have a voice since I'm your husband. Either my way or the highway, that is. Make your choice, Cheryl," I said, refusing to back down. She looked over my face, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man she knew, but all she saw was a stranger with avaricious eyes focused on her wealth. When she realized how deep the lie had gone, the guy she could no longer recognize eclipsed her. Her marriage turned out to be a fraud. Despite her internal turmoil, she managed to say, "Fine," with a fairly steady voice. "If that's what you want, then we're done." "But I warn you," she continued, "don't expect to touch a single cent of my money." My smile vanished and was replaced by a look of complete surprise. I didn't anticipate this. I turned around on my heel, stormed out, and slammed the door. Cheryl was by herself while her heart raced. Now the lines were clearly marked. This was now more about her freedom and dignity than it was about money. Cheryl was making breakfast the following morning when the house fell strangely quiet. Her wrath grew as she saw scenes from the altercation from last night over and over in her head. How could I have been so callous? The money wasn't just some random lottery win. Rather, it was a bequest left by her mother, and wasn't something I could spend carelessly. Lisa and Mark, our kids, noticed the heated mood, but said nothing. Even though they were too little to understand the nuances of adult issues, they could sense that something wasn't quite right. For their sake, Cheryl forced a grin. She drove to her late mother's house, which is now empty but nonetheless replete with memories of the past, after leaving them off at school. She recalled, as she sat in the living room, how my parents used to make crude remarks about their children and lifestyle choices. They had always adhered to gender norms, and it appeared that I had picked up on these antiquated ideas. My mother had once mockingly said, "I can't understand why you're still working." Her disdain was evident. A woman's place is at home with the children. I'd never stood up for her. My parents used to make hurtful comments, but I always told her to ignore them. However, Cheryl's self-esteem was repeatedly pricked by those remarks, which felt like needles. Now that her mother had passed away and our marriage was failing, she was filled with animosity against me. She had always been on her own against my parents' criticism, and I had never really been a companion to her. She remembered clearly how my parents had publicly expressed their yearning for a grandson when she was expecting Lisa. Their dismay was evident from the moment Lisa was born. They had urged, next time, make sure it's a boy. In the solitude of the home, Cheryl's determination sharpened. She was aware of her obligations. My parents had been very vocal about their disappointment, hardly hiding it. It hurt too much to see my kid go through such obvious favoritism. Raymond now wanted us to take use of my wealth, to become closer to his parents, and further immerse ourselves in their poisonous atmosphere. Her blood shot up at the very thought. She was going to make sure that didn't happen. She could feel her resolve strengthening as she sat among her mother's belongings. She was not going to be bullied. She made the decision to defend her children as well as herself. Now that Raymond had revealed his true nature, it was time to deal with the fallout. She was ready for the conflict that lay ahead. The battle lines had been drawn. Cheryl prepared for the impending court battle by gathering crucial documents over the course of the following few days. Her attorney, Gloria, a perceptive woman, was comforting. "You're okay, Cheryl. We'll ensure that inheritance remains in its proper place," she smiled confidently. One evening, as Cheryl sorted through her mother's belongings, she discovered an old, dusty envelope hidden in a drawer. Inside, she found a collection of documents, stock certificates, and property deeds. Her hands trembled as she grasped the full extent of her mother's hidden wealth, which, including the current value of the stocks and properties, amounted to a staggering $7 million. She was in awe. Her mother, who had always lived modestly, had accumulated a small fortune. She had been incredibly prudent with her money, a fact that now offered a new ray of hope and strength. Cheryl never imagined her mother had saved so much. An accompanying note, penned in her mother's neat handwriting, read, "Cheryl, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." As Cheryl read her mother's words, tears filled her eyes. Her foresight and love enveloped her like a warm embrace, transcending even from beyond the grave. The next day, Cheryl resolved to confront Raymond about his ill-conceived plan to misuse her inheritance. She found him in the living room, casually browsing through a magazine. "Raymond, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm and composed. He looked up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "What is it now, Cheryl?" he asked. "I found something from my mother," she began, waving the envelope. "It turns out she left me stocks and properties worth $7 million. Raymond's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and greed quickly passing over his face. $7 million. That's great news, he exclaimed. But his enthusiasm repulsed Cheryl. "Don't get any ideas, Raymond. This money is for me and the kids. You won't see a cent of it." His face darkened. "You can't keep it all to yourself, Cheryl. We're married. What's yours is mine," he snapped back. Anger surged within Cheryl. "You've shown your true colors, Raymond. You don't care about me or the kids. All you see are dollar signs." Raymond stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "You're being selfish, Cheryl. I'm thinking about our future, about our family." "What family, Raymond? The one you're ready to sacrifice for your selfish desires?" she retorted. He stepped closer, fist clenched. "You'll regret this, Cheryl. I'll make sure of it." Cheryl stood her ground, unflinching. "Bring it on, Raymond. I'm not afraid of you anymore." He stormed out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She knew this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but she was ready, for her children, for her mother's legacy, and for herself. The following week was a whirlwind of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Raymond's demeanor had shifted from shock to cold, calculated aggression. He was like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. One evening, while the kids slept, Raymond cornered Cheryl in the kitchen. His eyes were wild, his stance threatening. "You think you're clever, Cheryl, hiding that money from me." Cheryl leaned against the counter, her heart pounding, prepared for whatever would come next. But her voice remained steady. "It's not about being clever, Raymond. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your unrealistic dreams." He slammed his fist on the countertop, making her flinch. "I am your husband. I have rights to that money," he claimed, his words dripping with venom. Cheryl interrupted him. "A what, Raymond? A woman who refuses to submit to your greed and bullying." His face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, Cheryl. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money." Cheryl could sense the danger in his words, but refused to show any fear. "Is that a threat, Raymond?" she asked. He leaned in, his breath foul. "It's a promise." She pushed past him, her body shaking with adrenaline. "We'll see about that. The court will decide." As she walked away, his voice filled with malice followed her. "You're going to be left with nothing, Cheryl. Nothing." The next day, Cheryl received a call from her lawyer. "Cheryl, Raymond has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance." I took a deep breath, a mix of fear and determination stirring within me. Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. Gloria's voice was firm. We have a strong case, Cheryl. Don't worry, we'll make sure justice is served. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms. I dedicated myself to this battle, for them, for their future. Raymond had become a stranger, a man driven by greed and malice. Yet I was no longer the woman he thought he could control and intimidate. As I closed my eyes, I envisioned the courtroom, the judge, and the final verdict. I pictured myself standing tall, fighting vigorously, not just for the money, but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had always shown. This was my battle, and I was fully prepared for it. The ensuing legal battle was grueling. Raymond's strategy was transparent, to portray me as an uncooperative wife hoarding the family's resources. But how could he understand? His arguments were weak, more a display of desperation than a solid legal foundation. One afternoon, we found ourselves in mediation, a last effort to resolve matters before the court hearing. Raymond sat across from me, his lawyer by his side, his gaze icy and demeanor self-assured. Let's be reasonable, Cheryl, his lawyer started. Raymond is entitled to a part of this inheritance. It's only fair. I looked over at Gloria, my determination unwavering. Fair. Raymond has not contributed to this inheritance. It is solely from my late mother, intended for me and my children. Raymond leaned forward, his tone derisive. Come on, Cheryl, you're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share? I felt a rush of anger. This isn't about spite, Raymond. It's about justice. You've never genuinely considered what the kids want. This is about your greed. His lawyer started to interject, but Raymond signaled him to stop. You think you can just take everything, don't you? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife, he sneered. I met his gaze squarely. This isn't a game, Raymond. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours. The mediator, a stern-faced, middle-aged woman, interjected. Let's try to remain civil. This is about finding a resolution. Raymond cut her off, his voice rising. A resolution. She's the one being unreasonable. The tension in the room was palpable, thick, and suffocating. I responded calmly yet firmly. I am being perfectly reasonable. I'm protecting what my mother left for her grandchildren. Raymond's claims are baseless. Sensing the futility of the discussion, the mediator called for a break. As we stood up, Raymond leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. You'll pay for this, Cheryl. I'll make sure of it. His words were a chilling promise, but I remained resolved to stand my ground for the legacy and the rights of my children. I exited the mediation room, my heart pounding yet my resolve firm. Raymond's threats rang hollow. His legal standing was weak. Confident that the law was on my side, I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to the battle ahead. In the weeks leading up to the court hearing, I buried myself in legal preparations with Gloria. The kids stayed with my sister, spared from the worst of the upheaval. I missed them deeply, but I understood that this struggle was not just for my benefit, but for their future as well. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and I stood in the courtroom. I steeled myself to face Raymond and counter any misleading story he might present. This was the pivotal moment, and I was ready to fight with every fiber of my being. The courtroom transformed into a battleground where words served as weapons. And Raymond's lawyer spun a narrative of a husband wronged, deprived of his rightful share. Yet under Gloria's adept questioning, his claims quickly fell apart, disintegrating like a house of cards. During a recess, Raymond confronted me in the hallway, his expression contorted with rage. You're ruining everything, Cheryl. You think you're going to walk away with all that money? Despite the fear that nibbled at my resolve, I stood firm. It's not your money, Raymond. It never was. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I'll drag this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry with legal fees. Meeting his intense gaze, I responded with unwavering firmness. Do what you must, but I won't let you bully me into submission. As we re-entered the courtroom, a wave of empowerment surged through me. Raymond's threat seemed more hollow than ever. His bravado was merely a facade for his desperation. When the final verdict was delivered, it was a vindication of my rights. The judge declared the inheritance mine, acknowledging my legal and moral claim to it. Raymond's face, as the judgment was read, mirrored the defeat of his case, a reflection of a battle fought and lost on his part. However, the victory was bittersweet. I had won the legal battle, but at the cost of my marriage. The family dynamic I had cherished was now fractured. In the weeks that followed, Raymond's life began to unravel. His reputation, once built on a foundation of lies and intimidation, crumbled. The community started to see him for the greedy individual who had tried to exploit his wife's inheritance. Rumors reached me about his myriad struggles, losing his job, his friends, and his standing in the community. It was a dramatic fall from grace, and despite everything, I felt a sense of poetic justice. One evening, a mutual acquaintance called. "Cheryl, have you heard about Raymond?" they asked. I hesitated, then replied, "No, what about him?" "He's moving out of town. Lost his job, his house. He's pretty much broke." A complex emotion welled up inside me, not quite satisfaction, but something akin to it. Raymond had reaped what he sowed. He had aimed to destroy me, but ended up destroying himself instead. After hanging up, I looked at a picture of my children on the mantel. This fight had been for them, for their future and security. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle was over, and we had emerged stronger. We were finally free from Raymond's shadow, ready to start a new chapter. Our lives would be different, but we would be okay. We were together, and that was what mattered most. In the months following the court ruling, life found a new rhythm. The court victory granted me a sense of closure and a fresh start. The victory in court wasn't just an end. It marked the beginning of a new journey, one of healing and rebuilding. I decided it was time to sell the house, the backdrop of so many bitter memories. Each item I packed symbolized a step away from my past with Raymond, a deliberate stride toward a better future for Lisa and Mark. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a photograph of Raymond and me in happier times. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we had, the love I believed was real. But as I stared at his smiling face in the photo, I realized that the man I had married no longer existed. He had revealed his true nature, and it was far from the image captured in that picture. With a sense of finality, I tossed the photo into the trash bin, a symbolic gesture of letting go. We had a new beginning when we moved to a new town. The kids rapidly made friends at their new school and soon adjusted to their new surroundings when I found them a pleasant home in a nice community. I started focusing more on my writing since it gave me comfort and allowed me to express myself in the worlds I made up. I was putting Lisa to bed one evening when she said, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" with her large, innocent eyes. Her question took me by surprise. Admittedly, there are moments when I long for the dad I once knew, but things have worked out better now. Between the three of us, we make a formidable team. With a depth of expression that belied her age, she nodded. "Mom, I enjoy being here. Our new house is nice." Her words warmed me deeply. Yes, we had gone a long way. That night, as I laid in bed, I thought about Raymond's failure. His avarice and animosity had backfired spectacularly, destroying everything he owned. And yet here we were, stronger and closer than ever, rebuilding and enjoying our new existence. Even though I was sorry for Raymond, there was a strong sense of justice in the way things had worked out. I had a long way to go before the kids and I were fully healed, but we were headed in the right direction. With the inheritance safely deposited, we could be sure our necessities and their schooling would be met. I thought about my mother when I closed my eyes. Our salvation had really come from her courage and wisdom. She had given me the tools to defend my kids and myself based on her expertise. I had a deep sense of calmness as I drifted off to sleep. Clarity and optimism had returned after the storm that had previously threatened to engulf us had passed. Now that the worst had passed and a new day was breaking, we were prepared to face whatever lied ahead with hope and fresh vigor. Just as I was going to use your card to book a vacation with my pals, I received a call from Liam. I had noticed something strange about his covert discussions with Margaret and his late arrival home. Was he hatching a scheme against her? I suspected they were working together on a plan from the beginning, but luckily I was prepared for whatever they had in store. Maybe I should act shocked when I approach him. Really? Oh my God. Describe. It's incredible if Liam believes he can fool me, even though I knew he had planned to go on a trip today. I've been calm up until now, but today I lost my patience and wanted to take revenge badly. It's time to confront these obnoxious siblings. I anticipate that the truth will surface after today. I hope they have a great trip, not realizing that I have an ally in their group. I'm Ashley, 35, and I live with my spouse, Liam. Upon my high school graduation, I started working at my present employer right away. I've obtained numerous certificates and a great deal of experience over the years, which has allowed me to land a leadership position at the early age of 20. Even though I'm older than Liam, I manage him at work. After he started working for the company, I trained him and 2 other people. We were close in age, but I took over as his manager very soon. After we moved in together and started dating, our relationship took a conventional path. But when we got engaged, Liam proposed that I become a stay-at-home wife, imagining a time when I took care of the house and we had a family. I soon expressed my worries about our financial situation and my reluctance to leave my job, even after having kids. I was annoyed that he felt uncomfortable with my larger income, even though I could understand his desire to buy a house. I suggested a middle ground. Let's prioritize organizing our nuptials and house purchase for the time being, and we can discuss kids and my career later. We decided to carry out that idea. To be honest, I didn't plan to quit my work, but I brought up the idea in order to avoid Liam's incessant proposals. While Margaret, Liam's sister, was away due to travel, our engagement celebration brought both families together as our wedding drew near. It was on the day of our wedding that I first saw her. She stormed into the waiting area, gave me a cursory assessment, and said, "So this is who Liam selected. Pretty blah in comparison to his other selections, huh?" I forced a grin and said, "Nice to meet you, Margaret." But all she did was wave dismissively before walking away, leaving me to wonder at her audacious behavior. My new sister-in-law was, as it turned out, quite the character. I later introduced myself to Margaret's husband, and he appeared to be a really kind person. After the beautiful wedding ceremony, Liam and I couldn't wait to move into our new home that we had collectively chosen. Anticipating a hectic schedule, I put more effort into my work. It was a seemingly ordinary day off when the doorbell rang. Since I was busy, I let Liam respond. He came back into the room, laughing and joking. Margaret had dropped by without warning. She casually strolled in and said, "Hi, Ashley. I see Liam is doing really well." having a home that size. Well done, sir. He is, after all, my younger brother. I've been working hard. She turned to face me. Ashley, please feel at home. Have we not had any nibbles or something? Hurry, my sister is here. Liam became more of a shifter. He took on an air of superiority, perhaps bragging to his sister that he had paid cash for the house. Liam insisted on his name being the only one on the title, even though I had paid the down payment and shared equal responsibility for the mortgage payments. Whose name was on the paperwork didn't seem essential at the time, but I didn't like how he presented it to Margaret. Choosing to keep the peace, I refrained from making a scene and calmly offered, "Here are some snacks." Liam works hard, you know. Why does Ashley sound so bossy? Margaret whispered to Liam. I overheard and couldn't help but retort, "Well, I am Liam's supervisor at work." Oh, I see. Did I miss that? Ashley was a manager at the company when I started. Her career began right out of high school when she decided to leave out in order to pursue employment options. I distinctly recall thinking to myself that I could have quickly exceeded her accomplishments if it had been me. But this idea resulted in a rather awkward exchange of words. "You dropped out of high school one day," I questioned, a little bewildered. "Even though I have more formal education than you seem so confident." She said calmly, "It's true, but keep in mind that I'm your sister-in-law. And I guess I could ask you anything since you didn't complete your education, right?" That was a strange remark. Is it actually the way it operates? I pondered out loud. Ashley went on, "My sister says whatever she says is true. She might simply throw you out if you don't agree." I couldn't understand this rationale. It felt ridiculous that someone could expect me to do anything simply because I didn't have a high school degree, and the danger of getting expelled was just ridiculous. To save myself from more unpleasantness, I forced myself to smile politely and excused myself to the kitchen. I could still hear them talking about the same thing in serious tones from the kitchen. A little later, my sister-in-law trailed me into the kitchen, her expression taking on a more solemn tone. In a casual tone, she said, "Hey, Ashley, I need a favor. I must take out a loan of money, roughly $7,100. Could you please assist? $7,100. That's a significant amount," I retorted in shock. "For what purpose is it needed? It only amounts to $7,100. I take it you're a supervisor. You must make a nice living," she said, dismissing my worries. I needed to cover a few of my new condo's outstanding renovation costs. She had been bragging about her opulent new condo just a few days prior. She was requesting money now. Then Liam spoke up from behind, saying that since he was going to lend the money to his sister, I should just give it to her. "Why would you decide that without first talking to me, Margaret?" Startled, I inquired. "Listen, Ashley, I'll phone our employer right now and tell him you want to quit if you don't give me the money." "Which one will it be?" I said, I'm resigned yet cautious, but with one caveat. "Okay, Margaret, I will lend you the money. However, a promissory note must be created beforehand. We may be relatives, but I still want it in writing. Bring your picture ID with you when you come to pick up the money." She grumbled, "Oh, what a hassle, but fine. I will come over tomorrow night if you will give me the money." Margaret complained, but the following day she did bring everything needed. This event really brought home to me how much Liam was influenced by his sister, even though I was unaware of it before our marriage. It appeared that nothing I said would have changed the situation. Later on, I discovered that Margaret used the money to buy designer items. Once she saw I was willing to lend money, she began to ask for more, though I made sure she signed a promissory note every single time. Over time, Margaret had borrowed around $100 $55,000 from me. Just as I was starting to feel overwhelmed by the financial strain, an unexpected call from the office brought a much-needed lift to my spirits. I was being promoted from a supervisor to a department manager. Thrilled with the news, I couldn't wait to share it with Liam, who had taken the day off. "I'm home, Liam. Guess what?" I exclaimed, bursting with excitement. "Welcome back, Ashley. You seem excited. What happened today?" Liam responded, noticing my enthusiasm. "My boss called me in and offered me the position of department manager. I've always dreamed of becoming the head manager, and this promotion brings me one step closer." "Wait, what?" "Ashley, you're getting promoted." "I don't understand." "Did you accept the offer?" "Of course I did. I've always told you about my goal. Remember?" I replied, slightly puzzled by his reaction. "Hold on. You should have asked for my permission before making such a decision. Plus, I've told you I wanted you to be a stay-at-home wife, haven't I? How come you're getting promoted and I'm still stuck in the same position? Doesn't that seem odd?" "That's not my fault, Liam. I've made it clear that I don't want to quit my job. Why you can't get promoted is beyond me." Shortly after our exchange, Liam made a phone call, and I had a sinking feeling he was speaking to his sister. Sure enough, Margaret showed up a few minutes later. "Hey, I heard you stole Liam's promotion opportunity. What's the big idea?" she accused as soon as she walked in. "I didn't steal anything. At our company, promotions are based on performance," I defended myself. "So you're saying Liam's incompetent at his job? How dare you look down on him? As his wife, this is ridiculous. Let's go grab some barbecue on her dime," Margaret snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. Before I could protest, they rummaged through my purse, took my bank card, and despite my attempts to resist, I was outnumbered and ultimately restrained. They left, laughing while I was left in tears, regretting my life choices. I shouldn't have married such a man, I thought, realizing it was too late for regrets, but not too late for action. I need to find a good divorce lawyer. That night, Liam didn't come home. The next day at work, he approached me with a smug look. Yesterday was a blast. Eating on someone else's dime is the best. "Thanks for the treat," he said, handing me the receipt. It was from an upscale barbecue restaurant, totaling $2,500, and there were also receipts from luxurious bars that added up to an unbelievable $8,000. I wanted to confront him right there, but the office was bustling with employees arriving for the day, so I held my tongue. On my way home, I checked the bank transactions and was shocked to see a total of $122,000 withdrawn. When I confronted Liam at home, I demanded, "Liam, what were you thinking? Spending $112,000 on a fancy barbecue and luxurious bars." "It's my money." It was money I had saved from before I was married. Just as I arrived home, Liam started complaining. "That money from your single days." "I don't know, don't care. Can't do anything about it now since I've already spent it." He casually dismissed my concerns before locking himself in the bathroom. That was the last straw. Over the weekend, I decided to consult with a divorce attorney. Since that day, several weeks had passed, and my divorce preparations were moving forward smoothly. Meanwhile, Liam's behavior became increasingly suspicious. He often came home late and rushed out early on his days off. I even considered hiring a private investigator to keep tabs on him. One day, I received an unexpected call from Henry, my sister-in-law Margaret's husband. "Hello, is this Ashley's number?" "Yes, Henry." "It's rare to hear from you," I replied, puzzled. "Yeah, it's been a while." "Anyway, is my wife there?" "Margaret?" "No, she's not here. I informed him. I see. She's been coming home late and leaving without telling me on weekends. She said she was at Liam's place when I asked her yesterday. That's odd. Liam's been acting similarly. Maybe they're going somewhere together. Honestly, it's none of my business anymore, so I don't care, I confessed. Oh, and Henry, there's something I need to tell you too. Can you hear me out? None of your business anymore. What do you mean? He asked, sounding concerned. I then told him everything that had transpired, the money I lent Margaret and the subsequent events. Upon hearing this, Henry sighed deeply. Is that so? I'm sorry to hear about my wife. To be honest, I've been at my breaking point and considered getting a divorce, but I just couldn't take action. Henry, you should use the evidence I've gathered. Maybe you should consider a divorce too. It's not fair for you to be stuck in this situation. Let's give those selfish siblings a taste of their own medicine. Yeah, let's work together on this, he agreed. By the way, I think Margaret and the others might be planning a trip. He mentioned that she had urged him to take a long vacation, and there were travel brochures on my vanity. Curious, I decided to look inside a shelf that Liam had always told me not to touch. Sure enough, I found more travel brochures and club cards. It all started to make sense. Henry, I think they might be planning a trip. I found some brochures. I've got an idea, I shared excitedly. As I explained my plan, Henry laughed and agreed to go along with it. We were both ready to turn the tables on our manipulative spouses. After deciding to collaborate, Henry and I continued our communication through texts and ended our phone call. I sent him several pieces of potential evidence that might be useful for his divorce case. Over the next couple of weeks, we meticulously plotted our next moves. 3 weeks later, early one morning, Liam left the house, a departure I was aware of because Henry had informed me the day before. A few hours into his outing, Liam called, sounding triumphant. I'm going to have a blast using your card with my friends, he boasted. His late nights and secretive calls with Margaret had already tipped me off that something was amiss. Oh, really? What do you mean by that? I played along, feigning ignorance. Seriously, you didn't notice. We planned this trip ages ago. Henry was just our backup in case something went wrong. We thought you were getting too arrogant and decided it was time to teach you a lesson. Now you can't stand up to us anymore, he jeered. I kept my cool, replying, I don't have to tolerate this any longer. I've been patient for so long. A little payback isn't too much to ask for. Feeling detached and void of emotion, I questioned him further. Liam, what did you say earlier about using my debit card? I have my card in my wallet, though. What are you talking about? Here it is. Wait, what the heck is this? There was confusion in his voice. You just noticed? A bit slow, huh? Didn't you take my old gym membership card from the fitness club I used to go to? It's the same color and same stiffness, I pointed out calmly. Oh my God, it does say fitness club, but I swear when I checked it looked like a debit card. Are you sure you didn't just mix them up? Liam was flustered. Hey, I heard everything because you're on speaker. Henry chimed in, equally confused. What's going on? Liam brought a fitness membership card. I'm sure I saw my debit card. Ah, so it was a scheme by Margaret and Liam, huh? I'm so disappointed, I revealed, feigning dismay. Last night, I switched the debit card with the membership card. Seems like you didn't check this morning and just went with it. What? Dude, what the heck are you playing at? Liam's voice crackled with frustration. No, I should be the one asking that, I retorted. Tough break, huh? Don't get too cocky just because you're my stepsister. Got it? You'll remember this when you get back. I've got gifts waiting for both of you when you come back. You trying to bribe us? I won't accept anything but cash. Liam shot back. We'll see about that. Look forward to it, I replied, dismissing his demands. That's beside the point. What should we do now? Oh, Ashley, can you send me some money? Liam's plea was desperate. I hung up the phone, having no desire to entertain any more of his nonsense. After Liam's manipulative message saying, "You better send it, okay." Or worst case scenario, we still have Henry here, you know. I simply replied with, "Is that so?" and went back to sleep. However, my rest was short-lived. I was jolted awake in the afternoon by the incessant ringing of my phone, and the screen lit up with a staggering number of missed calls and messages. First, I dialed my brother-in-law, and then I took Liam's call. "Hey, finally, send the money ASAP, please. It's so cold. I think I'm going to freeze." They were in Alaska, and considering it was February, you can imagine just how freezing it must have been. Seems like my plan worked, I mused aloud. Really? You said Henry would help, right? Or is he not there? Liam's voice held a note of desperation. What? You know something. Anyway, it's freezing and Henry's not here. He continued, sounding bewildered. Should I clue you in? Since you and Margaret teamed up, Henry and I did too. Simple, right? Now do you get why I entertained you guys for so long on that first call, to buy time? And Henry? He hopped on another plane and is coming back here. I explained, satisfaction tinting my tone. What's your deal with my husband? Don't tell me you're wrong. We teamed up to get back at you. Now find your way back. See you. With that, I hung up. Henry should be arriving here soon. I decided to call my lawyer. We had our final meeting regarding the divorce before Liam and the others would return. Why did I gather everyone here? I pondered aloud, knowing that Liam and his group would surely confront me upon their return. A few hours later, as soon as Liam and his group returned, they started yelling. Ashley, hey, what the hell? What were you thinking? Be prepared to move out, okay. Henry's with you, isn't he? Why did you even come back first? Unbelievable. Are you okay with me leaving? You apologize. Shut it. Sit down, Henry, unusually assertive, shouted, stunning Liam and his companion into silence. The lawyer promptly handed out his business cards to both of them. They looked dumbfounded as they stared at the cards. Well, here's a gift from us, Henry and I said, handing them a stack of papers. As they read through them, their faces turned pale. Wait a minute. This mentions property division. You're not saying it's about divorce, are you? Liam stammered in disbelief. It's written online, too. It's a divorce, I confirmed. And what did I do? Divorce has got to be a joke, right? Yeah, right, Henry scoffed. Let's head home. I'll go first, I declared, holding a stack of papers. I've been recording your outbursts, Liam, even that call from your vacation. You don't even understand what you've done. I can't continue this way with you. Are you sure about this? Liam asked, disbelief etching his voice. I said it, didn't I? I'm demanding half of the down payment from our house purchase, the rest of the mortgage, and repayment for the savings you squandered from my single days. I turned to Margaret, who was attempting to interject. And Margaret, you spent the money you borrowed from me and also dipped into my savings with Liam. You're going to repay that. No, wait. Liam didn't buy this house, and I never borrowed or used any of it. Margaret protested, her voice rising in panic. Please go through everything, I insisted calmly, gesturing towards the documents. There's a promissory note in there for the amount you've borrowed. No way. I don't know anything about this. If there's no proof, Margaret's voice trailed off as she grabbed a document, tearing it into pieces and tossing them aside. Simultaneously, Liam stomped on the voice recorder, smashing it under his foot. First of all, Liam, even if you destroy that recorder, there's still data on my computer. And Margaret, that wasn't the original document, I said, shaking my head at their rash actions. What the hell are you two doing? Liam blurted out, his frustration evident. Oops, indeed. You two don't think things through, I retorted. Margaret, I have a claim against you too. You spent all the savings and got cozy with that guy at the bar. Both of them were visibly shaken, tears forming as the reality of their situation dawned on them. I detailed the claims. Liam, you owe a total of $142,000. $10,000 for emotional damages, $120,000 for the down payment on the house, and $112,000 for miscellaneous expenses. There's also an upcoming loan repayment of $3,000. To Margaret, it amounts to $40,000. $10,000 for miscellaneous expenses, and $30,000 for a loan she acknowledged with a promissory note. Henry's claims against Margaret amount to $160,000, $40,000 for emotional damages, and $120,000 for miscellaneous expenses. Without any division of assets like condos, I was confident they wouldn't sue, as the attorney cleverly added, if you sue, you're going to lose for sure. No one will represent you, and it'll just cost you more. Work hard on your repayments, he added. With the settlement clear, I grabbed my packed belongings and left the house. Word had spread at my office, and Liam was transferred to another branch shortly after. Only a few weeks later, I received a message from Liam. Ashley, I want to see you. I never thought life without you would be this lonely. Can we give it another shot? You can work as much as you want. That is not going to occur. Goodbye, I said with firmness. Then there was a message from Margaret. This is Margaret Ashley. I believe you ought to talk to my brother again. Why don't we share a home? Perhaps there has been miscommunication between us. That's when I realized nothing had really changed. Their deeds screamed more than words could, thus it was the right option for me to depart. I think things will be better if we go our separate ways, I told Margaret firmly. That is not going to occur. I apologize. Farewell. They begged me to ignore them, but I refused, blocking their contacts in order to go forward. A little while later, Henry received a similar call from them, so he followed suit. I saw my former house was for sale as I drove by it in the taxi. Since I had severed all ties with them, I was unable to learn how they were coping without the resources they had previously taken for granted. The financial settlements had been completed all at once. For me, positive progress was made in my life. I made a fresh start by moving and buying an apartment. Work has also been satisfying. I recently received word from my supervisor that I've been promoted to regional director, a role I've long desired. Besides, I've started hanging out with Henry after work. We have a lot in common and have easy, interesting conversations despite our different ages. My life is now easier, and my relationship with Henry feels natural. The quality of living has actually improved since the divorce. I'm glad I made the decision to go since it presented me with fresh prospects and offered me new avenues. What transpired between Henry and myself afterwards is a story for another occasion. I'm planning a special trip to Spain with our parents to celebrate his retirement. To make the most of our joyous trip, I will be utilizing your Platinum card for purchases as of right now. We have to depart shortly, so I hope you can see the urgency. I'm not quite sure. Could you elaborate on what you meant to do with my card? Could you elaborate on the journey a little bit? I apologize, but I have to go now. When I get back, we can talk about the specifics. However, just be aware that the card could not function. Money seems that my spouse, Daniel, has already used money to pay for a trip to see our parents. Daniel is someone I've put up with a lot, but this is becoming beyond me. He'll regret his choice when he gets back. My name is Elizabeth, and I graduated from a famous institution and have built a great career at a major firm. I am 35 years old. Even though I'm young, I make enough money to support Daniel, who isn't working right now, as well as maybe a child, though we haven't yet started a family. After 4 years of marriage, we're thinking about starting a family. Even though I have a reliable career and a healthy salary, I'm not totally content with my life. The notion of starting a family remains merely that, a notion. Daniel's unemployment, meanwhile, is an unavoidable fact. I had a snack earlier, so I'm not hungry tonight, but that's not as bad as Daniel's work predicament. Instead of going to a job interview today, he stayed at home and looked through employment websites. Since quitting his previous full-time employment a year ago, Daniel has only had temporary part-time jobs, which he has left after a short while. Right now, he's considering part-time and full-time work. I'm always telling him to concentrate on getting a full-time job. I know everything has its proper time, but I wish he could find a job that will last. He left his former work for a cause, so it's understandable that he can't be pushed too hard. But it's time he found a stable position. Daniel's disagreement over work policies led to a difficult situation at his previous job. With the support of his coworkers, he first refused to back down from his supervisor. But when things got more heated, Daniel's colleagues turned back to the boss, leaving him alone, feeling deceived and deserted. He eventually resigned from the company after finding it more and more difficult to stay on. Following his resignation, Daniel withdrew into himself and stayed mostly by himself in his room. After a few weeks, he started to assist with household chores and get back involved in daily life. He was joking about it, saying he had lots of time on his hands, but his smile stopped short of his eyes. Daniel took an additional 3 weeks before he resumed his job search. He was eager to start over and felt positive about the interviews, but he found that finding a job was harder than he had thought. Rejections mounted despite his qualifications and efforts, which he linked to his acrimonious exit from his prior position. He became discouraged and began to doubt his value as a result. Daniel was profoundly impacted by the cycle of rejection, which made him feel defiant and despairing. I once returned home to discover resumes in shredded form all over the floor of the living room. His most recent interview had obviously not gone well. I took a measured approach and advised him to discard the torn documents. Then Daniel said he wanted to give up looking for a job completely because we could make ends meet on my pay alone. Though some people are happy being stay-at-home moms full-time, Daniel never saw himself in this role. It appeared more like a way out of the difficulties he was having finding work. I chose to give him room and support in the hopes that he would find his way because I understood how difficult he was and the effects of his previous work experience. The arrangement wasn't long-term viable, so in the interim, we needed to have a serious discussion about our future and his job goals. Since I've always been committed to my profession, I won't be sitting about over this long sabbatical. It's intended to be a time of getting ready for the next phase. Hearing that you're concentrating on the future is comforting. There are dynamics associated with living near to my in-laws, Daniel's parents, Helen and Peter. After Daniel quit his work, they began to visit him more often, probably out of concern for him. They were genuinely happy to learn that he was preparing for his next professional step, but the truth was far different. Can you get some more beer on your way home? We're running low. One evening, I inquired, "Once more, you're imbibing excessively. Try to reduce it a little," I kindly advised. "Okay, I'll stop asking now." Daniel gave a fairly brusque response. "I'll get it myself." Daniel was not, despite appearances, getting ready for a new career. He spent much of his days drinking beer and watching TV. I believe he was ashamed of his unemployment and decided to spare his parents the whole truth in order to spare their feelings. Having not looked for a job for almost 4 months, I thought it was time to confront the big issue. "Daniel, perhaps it's time to resume your job search. You appear more at ease now," I dared. "My last job ended just 7 months ago. After everything that occurred, you want me to go back to work?" He asked in a tone that was both irritated and incredulous. I simply feel like there has been a long pause. I pushed, "Let's not drag this out," but was met with a "avoid bothering me." When things are going well at work, you are unable to comprehend how I feel. You know, I have my issues. Everybody has relationship and career concerns. Though Daniel left during our chat, obviously angered by our exchange, it felt like a step forward that he agreed to begin job hunting despite the tension. I was going to apologize to Daniel when he calmed down, hoping to diffuse the situation. He surprised me with his next report, saying, "I got a job because you pushed me." One day with a tone that was both reluctant and acknowledging. "It's fantastic." "Where?" I inquired. He answered, "At a nearby supermarket," and said, "So you'll need to learn and work hard, right?" His reply was contemptuous. "It's only a part-time job. Not too much labor is required." I think any employment, full-time or part-time, is important, but I refrained from saying anything more because I wanted to wait and see whether this would help him get back on track. Daniel declared, "I'm home," a few days later. "You returned early. How is your work at the pub?" I mixed up his real workplace when I asked. "I left my job at the grocery store. There was a bossy college student who kept telling me where to store the boxes. It seemed like harassment," he said, clearly frustrated. The student was probably just giving him advice on how to do things properly, which is standard procedure in any workplace. Yet Daniel kept finding and losing jobs. It became evident that obtaining the correct job was not the only obstacle Daniel faced in keeping a job. Since our last meaningful conversation about jobs a year ago, Daniel has told me that he is currently working part-time in a pub, an industry he has never attempted before. It intrigues him, and he thinks he may have found his real calling. "Are you serious?" "That sounds great," I reply, but I can't help but worry about the cost. "But isn't the income from a part-time job in a restaurant somewhat limited?" Daniel tells me, "That's okay," his eyes bright with a newfound resolve. "I'm apprenticing right now with the goal of becoming independent. One day, I hope to purchase my own home." That seems like a good plan, I respond, sincerely, that he has a purpose. And I gave him some cash to support his new business. "Here, take this and treat yourself to something nice for once," I said. But soon enough, the truth peeks out from behind Daniel's upbeat exterior. He leaves the pub job 5 days after our talk. Furthermore, he keeps lying to everyone, even his parents, from whom he fraudulently obtains money. This information comes as a severe blow, and I'm left feeling disappointed and angry with my spouse. I take advantage of a chance one evening while he's watching a movie, resolved to deal with the problem head-on rather than avoid it altogether. "Hey, Daniel, let's talk," I say, reaching for the remote and pausing the movie. "It's frustrating when you pause at the best part." "What is it?" Daniel complains, clearly annoyed. "Daniel, you're 37 now, right? That's prime working age. Don't you think about the future? Spending all day at home drinking and just watching TV." The future. There are plenty of 37-year-olds not working. Many people enjoy life without a job, he retorts defensively. True, work isn't everything, but those people have something else they're dedicated to. Do you have something like that? Yeah, I know you're upset about me not working. I'll look for another part. One day, while I was at work, I received an unexpected text from Daniel. Dad's retiring, so we're going to Spain to celebrate. Starting today, I'm borrowing your platinum card. We're going to enjoy ourselves on your credit card. Alarmed, I call him immediately. What do you mean, a trip? Just what I said. I don't understand. Just what I said. Please explain. The implications of his actions are manifold. Celebrating Peter's retirement is fine, but Daniel should have discussed the trip with me before using and essentially taking my money and credit card without asking. The thought that he might have told his parents he paid for it himself, using my credit card no less, fuels my anger and sense of betrayal. This situation is a stark reminder that despite some steps forward, deeper issues still need to be addressed. Daniel's recent actions brought us to a notable moment in our ongoing struggles with responsibility and communication as we discussed his upcoming trip to Spain. Daniel mentioned something that caught me off guard. My attention, you mentioned borrowing a credit card. Do you mean the one from our house? Yeah, why? He replied nonchalantly. I own a platinum credit card. Contrary to popular belief, it's not just for those with high incomes. Factors like credit history and stable income play a part. It's quite possible to secure one in your 30s. Despite its high annual fee, I find value in the benefits and points it offers. However, that credit card was supposed to be in my wallet, so you took the credit card from home. I pressed. Yeah, so I'm counting on you for the payment. Daniel responded a bit too cheerfully for the situation. His casual demeanor and readiness to depart made it clear he thought he had everything under control. But the truth was about to complicate his plan significantly. What are you waiting for? We need to leave, he urged, eager to get moving. Hold on, I interrupted. The credit card you took won't work. What? That can't be right. It's under Elizabeth's name, and it expires this month. It's close, but it shouldn't be an issue, he countered, disbelief creeping into his voice. You're lying, Elizabeth. You're lying to stop me from using the card, aren't you? Daniel accused, his frustration mounting. Yes, it does expire this month, I admitted. That's why I've already received a new credit card. Sometimes when a new card is activated, the old one stops working. I've already started using the new card, so the one you took won't work. Are you kidding me? You think I'm lying? Daniel's voice was tinged with panic now. If you don't believe me, I can send you the URL to the credit card website, or you can just try using the card. It would be funny to see you try to pay with a card that doesn't work. This credit card really won't work, he muttered more to himself than to me. I could hear his parents calling him in the background, but he seemed too flustered to respond. What should I do? I told them I'd pay for everything except the round-trip travel. Oh, they covered the flight? Yes. Dad felt bad about covering all the trip costs, Daniel explained, a hint of relief in his voice. What should I do? I'm about to take a cab, and I don't even have money for that. That's not my problem, I responded firmly. You said you would pay for everything except the flight. Using my credit card in the first place was wrong. You should pay with your own money. How can I? I don't have any money right now, Daniel exclaimed, the reality of his predicament sinking in. Daniel, you haven't been taking work seriously. I concluded, the situation unfolding as a stark reminder of the broader issues at play. Daniel's reliance on deception, rather than facing his responsibilities, head-on led us to yet another crossroads. It all came to a head when Daniel tried to impress his parents by taking them on a trip without having any actual means to fund it. As I hung up the phone to return to my work, I left Daniel in a predicament where he would eventually need to confess to his parents about his financial deception. Later that evening, after my workday ended, I received a call from Helen, Daniel's mother. I heard from Daniel. He tried to use your credit card and lied about working. I'm sorry for the trouble, she apologized. No, don't apologize, Helen. I'm sorry for the inconvenience with the credit card. Are you okay with the money? I asked, trying to smooth over the immediate concerns. We'll cover the cost of this trip when we return. I'll make sure Daniel apologizes and starts looking for a job immediately. Helen assured me, though her voice carried a hint of worry. I appreciate that, Helen, but I'm considering divorcing Daniel, I confessed, letting the weight of my decision hang between us. Divorce? Because of this? Helen's surprise was evident even through the phone. It's part of it, I admitted. Daniel has been taking money from me for a while. I stopped giving him money to limit his drinking. He got a part-time job and started buying his alcohol, but his salary couldn't cover his daily expenses. He's been taking money from my wallet to buy alcohol. Sometimes just $10, sometimes $50. Over a year, it added up. When he took my credit card for this trip, it wasn't just about the money anymore. It made me realize he had no intention of changing. I understand. Should I inform Daniel about the divorce? Helen asked, her tone now somber. Could you just tell him I want a divorce? We'll discuss the rest when he gets home, I requested, hoping to manage the situation more personally once he returned. The next morning, Daniel called, likely having learned about the divorce from Helen. I felt drained and chose not to answer. That evening, when I returned home from work, I found Daniel had cut his trip short and was waiting for me in the living room. I'll start working seriously now. Please don't leave me, he pleaded, his apology seeming sincere. Seeing Daniel immediately apologize and display remorse was unexpected, but it came far too late. He had a whole year to change, yet here he was asking for another chance now. After all my repeated warnings and the countless opportunities he wasted, I said, I'm not going to give you another chance, Daniel. You gave up on me a long time ago. My decision is final. Can you leave? I stood firm in my resolve to move forward without him. The cycle of broken promises had to end, and with it, our path together. Please don't say that. If you won't leave, should I move out? Only if you can afford the rent here, I told Daniel, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Daniel stopped talking. He was burdened by the stark realities of his precarious financial situation and impending divorce. Not to mention a reliable source of income, he didn't have enough money for rent for the upcoming month. He appeared to dwindle in front of my eyes as the realization dawned. Daniel had no choice but to silently leave the house. I saw him leave. Though I forced myself to remember that Daniel is not a child, a part of me wanted to give assistance with transportation. He must take care of his business. Seeing him go under such peculiar circumstances was a terrible event. Helen called me later, after Daniel had left for his parents' place. He was supposed to depart the following day, but they had allowed him to stay for the night. They were concerned that if he lingered on, it would increase his reliance on them. Even though it was difficult for them, they thought it was essential to Daniel's growth. Daniel spoke with obvious desperation when he got back to our place. Please provide a hand. I have no money and nowhere to go, he begged. That is the outcome of what you did. You must take care of this on your own, I firmly said. All Daniel had done in the last year was shirk his duties and do as he wanted. Denying him admission turning him away at our doorstep was agonizing but essential. With his parents' help, the heated divorce processes moved forward quickly. I don't know exactly what happened to Daniel after that. It's likely that he's still taking jobs and making up reasons why he can't stay in one place. Without Daniel, I didn't feel as lonely as I had anticipated. He had always made me nervous, and I had to tread carefully around him so as not to irritate him. Living without having to cater to his whims has allowed me to live a more comfortable life. Our existence together had unintentionally become a burden, something I didn't completely realize until he passed away. I'm living a lighter, more genuine life now that I'm free of that burden and am not dependent on the shortcomings and wants of other people.